The crack of a gunshot echoed through Willow Creek as Flora Garrison stood trembling, her golden hair whipping in the wind, watching her father collapse to the ground. The year was 1875, and in this dusty frontier town at the edge of Wyoming territory, Flora had just witnessed the death of her last protector. Through tear-blurred eyes, she watched the outlaw who'd shot her father gallop away, leaving her alone with nothing but the dying ranch and mounting debts her father had hidden from her. "Pa," she whispered, kneeling beside him in the dirt. "Pa, please." But Jonathan Garrison's eyes stared unseeing at the vast blue sky above. At 20 years old, Flora was now completely alone. The funeral was a sparse affair. Few people in Willow Creek had known her father well. He'd kept to himself, working their small cattle ranch miles outside of town with just Flora and occasionally hired hands to help. Flora stood alone by the fresh grave, clutching a handful of wildflowers as the preacher said his final words. "Miss Garrison." She turned to find Herbert Jenkins, the town's bank manager, standing behind her. His spectacles glinted in the sunlight, his expression one of practiced sympathy. "My deepest condolences for your loss," he said, removing his hat. "When you're ready to discuss your father's outstanding loans, please come see me at the bank." Flora nodded numbly. She had known about some of her father's debts, but only after his death did she discover just how dire their financial situation truly was. 3 days later, Flora sat across from Jenkins in the Willow Creek bank, staring at the figures written on the paper before her. "This can't be right," she said, her voice barely audible. "Pa couldn't possibly owe this much." "I'm afraid it's all documented, Miss Garrison," Jenkins replied, folding his hands. "Your father took several loans over the past 5 years. With interest, the amount due is $3,200. Flora felt the blood drain from her face. It was an impossible sum. "The ranch worth perhaps $1,000 in its current condition," Jenkins interrupted. "And that's being generous." "I need time," Flora pleaded. "I can work the land, sell the cattle." Jenkins shook his head. "The bank requires immediate payment." However, he paused, adjusting his spectacles. "There is a solution I might propose." Hope flickered in Flora's chest. "What solution?" "My son, Franklin, has recently returned from his education back east. He's looking to settle down, start a family." Flora's hope curdled into dread as she realized what Jenkins was suggesting. "Franklin has taken notice of you, Miss Garrison. He finds you suitable. He's willing to assume your father's debts in exchange for your hand in marriage." "You want to buy me?" Flora whispered, horrified. Jenkins' smile tightened. "I'm offering you security, Miss Garrison. A comfortable life as the wife of a banker's son. The alternative is losing everything and finding yourself destitute." Flora left the bank in a daze, tears blurring her vision. She had 1 week to decide: marry Franklin Jenkins or face ruin. The ranch felt emptier than ever that evening as Flora sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Her mother had died when she was 12, and her father had raised her to be strong, to love the land. This ranch was her home, her heritage. But now it seemed she would lose it no matter what she chose. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. A rider approached from the main road, his silhouette backlit by the setting sun. Flora stood, shielding her eyes against the glare. The stranger rode a magnificent chestnut stallion, his form straight and tall in the saddle. As he drew closer, Flora could make out his features: a strong jawline darkened by stubble, eyes the color of a summer storm, and dark hair that curled at the edges of his hat. "Evening, madam," he called, tipping his hat. "Name's Tucker Zimmerman. I'm looking for Jonathan Garrison." Flora felt her throat tighten. "My father passed away 4 days ago, Mr. Zimmerman." The stranger's expression fell, genuine sorrow crossing his features. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that, Miss Garrison. Your father and I had arranged for me to purchase some cattle from him." "I'm afraid the ranch isn't doing much business at the moment," Flora replied, her voice hollow. Tucker Zimmerman dismounted, leading his horse closer. "If you don't mind my asking, what happened?" "Outlaws," Flora said simply. "They'd been threatening him for months. Protection money, they called it, when he couldn't pay any more." She trailed off, unable to finish. Tucker nodded grimly. the Blackwell gang. They've been terrorizing ranches all through the territory. Flora looked up sharply. You know them, know of them, Tucker corrected. I've been tracking them for some time. Your father isn't their first victim. There was something in his tone that suggested more than casual interest. Flora studied him more carefully. His clothes were those of a cowboy, worn leather boots, dusty denim, a simple shirt with a bandana tied around his neck, but he carried himself differently than the ranch hands she knew. There was a confidence in his bearing, a watchfulness in his eyes. Are you some kind of lawman, Mr. Zimmerman? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Just a cowboy with a purpose, Miss Garrison. Tucker glanced at the darkening sky. It's getting late. I should find a place in town for the night. The nearest town is Willow Creek, 5 miles back, Flora said. But our bunkhouse is empty if you need a place to stay. Least I can do if you've come all this way. Tucker hesitated. I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition, Flora assured him, surprising herself with the offer. Truth is, I'd welcome the company. It's been lonely since Pa died. Something in Tucker's expression softened. Then I accept your hospitality, Miss Garrison. Thank you. After Tucker had settled his horse in the stable, Flora prepared a simple dinner of beans, cornbread, and coffee. They ate at the kitchen table, the silence between them surprisingly comfortable. How long have you lived here? Tucker asked, breaking the quiet. All my life, Flora replied. My parents came out here when Wyoming was barely settled. Pa built this house with his own hands. Tucker nodded appreciatively. It's good land. It is, Flora agreed, a lump forming in her throat, but I may not be able to keep it. She hadn't meant to share her troubles, but something about Tucker Zimmerman's steady presence made the words spill out. Before long, she found herself telling him about her father's debts and Herbert Jenkins' proposal. So I'm to be sold to the banker's son, she finished bitterly, staring into her coffee cup. Like a prized mare at auction. Tucker's jaw tightened, a flash of anger crossing his features. That's not right. What choice do I have? Flora asked. I can't pay the debt. I can't run the ranch alone. You shouldn't have to marry a man you don't love to keep what's rightfully yours, Tucker said firmly. There must be another way. If there is, I haven't found it, Flora sighed. And time is running out. After dinner, Tucker insisted on washing the dishes while Flora dried them. The simple domesticity of the task brought an unexpected comfort to Flora. For the first time since her father's death, she didn't feel completely alone. What's he like? Tucker asked as he handed her the last plate. This banker's son, Flora wrinkled her nose. Franklin Jenkins is proper, always dressed immaculately, even in this dusty town. He talks about nothing but money and his education back east. He looks at me like I'm a possession he's considering purchasing. And now he is, Tucker observed grimly. Yes, Flora whispered, now he is. That night, as Flora lay in bed listening to the crickets chirping outside her window, she thought about Tucker Zimmerman. There was something different about him, something that made her feel both unsettled and secure at the same time. Perhaps it was just having another person nearby, but she sensed it was more than that. Morning came with the crow of the rooster. Flora dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, surprised to find Tucker already awake and brewing coffee. Hope you don't mind, he said, gesturing to the pot. Figured you could use a cup after everything you're going through, Flora smiled gratefully. Thank you. As they sat drinking their coffee, Tucker studied her thoughtfully. I've been thinking about your situation, Miss Garrison. Please call me Flora, he nodded. Flora, I might have a proposition for you. Her heart sank slightly. Another proposition. Another man seeing an opportunity in her vulnerability. Tucker must have read her expression, for he quickly added, not that kind of proposition. I'm suggesting a business arrangement. Flora raised an eyebrow. What kind of arrangement? I know cattle, Tucker explained. And I know this territory. I could help you get the ranch back on its feet, build up the herd, repair the fences, make it profitable again. In exchange for what? Flora asked cautiously. A fair share of the profits, Tucker replied, and a place to stay while I continue my other business in the area. Tracking the Blackwell gang, Flora guessed. Tucker nodded, his eyes hardening. Among other things, Flora considered his offer. It seemed too good to be true, a solution appearing just when she needed it most. Why would you do this for a stranger? Tucker set down his cup, his gaze direct. Your father was a good man. He helped me once when I was down on my luck. Consider this repaying a debt. There was more to it than that, Flora sensed, but she didn't press. Even if I agreed, it wouldn't solve my immediate problem. Jenkins wants his money within the week. How much time would you need to consider his son's offer? I told him I'd give my answer after Sunday service, Flora replied. 5 more days. Tucker nodded thoughtfully. Then we have 5 days to find another solution. We. Flora echoed, surprised by his use of the word. Tucker's eyes met hers, steady and determined. Yes, if you'll allow me to help. Flora should have been more cautious. This man was virtually a stranger despite his claimed connection to her father. But something in Tucker Zimmerman's steady gaze made her trust him. All right, Mr. Zimmerman, Tucker, he corrected with a small smile. Tucker, she amended, we have 5 days. After breakfast, Tucker insisted on inspecting the ranch. Flora showed him the cattle, a small herd of 30 head that had once been triple that size, and the outbuildings in need of repair. As they walked the property, Tucker made mental notes and asked questions about the operations. Your father ran this place alone. Tucker asked, examining a broken fence post. With my help, Flora replied. And occasionally hired hands during calving season or roundup. Tucker nodded appreciatively. He taught you well. You know the ranch inside and out. He didn't have a son, Flora explained, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. He taught me everything he knew. That wasn't criticism, Tucker assured her. It was admiration. By midday, they'd completed their survey of the ranch. Tucker's assessment was honest, but not unkind. The place needed work, but had good bones and excellent grazing land. With proper management, this could be one of the most profitable spreads in the territory, he concluded as they sat in the shade of a large oak tree, sharing water from Flora's canteen. That's what Pa always said, Flora replied wistfully. He had such dreams for this place. Tucker studied her thoughtfully. And what about you, Flora Garrison? What are your dreams? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. I want to keep my home, she said simply. I want to honor my father's legacy, and beyond that. Flora looked out across the ranch, considering. I suppose I want what most people want, to build something that lasts, to matter, and she hesitated, feeling suddenly vulnerable, to not be alone. Tucker's gaze softened. Those are good dreams. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Tucker stood, offering his hand to help her up. His touch sent an unexpected warmth through Flora's arm, and she quickly withdrew her hand, flustered by her reaction. We should head back, she said, brushing dust from her skirt. There's still work to be done. Tucker nodded, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. Lead the way. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Tucker rose early each morning to tend to the cattle and repair fences, while Flora managed the household and garden. They worked together during the afternoons, Tucker teaching Flora more about cattle breeding and land management than even her father had known. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains while discussing possible solutions to Flora's financial troubles. Tucker suggested selling part of the land, but even that wouldn't raise enough money quickly enough. They considered a bank loan from a neighboring town, but word would get back to Jenkins, who would likely intervene. On the 3rd day, Tucker rode into town to gather information. He returned looking grim. What did you learn? Flora asked as she helped him unsaddle his horse. Jenkins is telling everyone you've agreed to marry his son, Tucker replied, his jaw tight. He's already invited people to a celebration after Sunday's service. Flora felt her stomach knot with anger and dread. He's that certain of me. Men like Jenkins are always certain, Tucker said bitterly. They believe money can buy anything or anyone. That evening, as they sat at the kitchen table eating stew, Tucker seemed preoccupied. Flora watched him push his food around his plate, his brow furrowed in thought. What is it? She finally asked. Tucker set down his spoon and met her gaze. I have an idea, but you might not like it. At this point, I'm willing to consider anything, Flora replied. What if you had another suitor? Tucker suggested. Someone who could outbid Jenkins' son. Flora frowned. I don't understand. If another man offered to pay your debts in exchange for your hand, Tucker explained, it would give you a choice at least. But there isn't another man, Flora pointed out, and I don't want to be bought by anyone, no matter how benevolent their intentions. Tucker nodded, accepting her rebuke. You're right, I apologize for suggesting it. No, Flora sighed, running a hand through her hair. I'm sorry for snapping. I know you're trying to help. It's just frustrating being treated like property. They finished their meal in silence, the weight of Sunday's approaching deadline hanging heavy between them. Later that night, unable to sleep, Flora slipped outside to sit on the porch steps. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light across the land. She startled when the door opened behind her, but relaxed when she saw it was Tucker. Couldn't sleep either, he asked softly, settling beside her on the step. Flora shook her head. Too much on my mind. Tucker nodded, understanding in his eyes. They sat in companionable silence, the night sounds of crickets and distant coyotes enveloping them. Tell me about the Blackwell gang, Flora said suddenly. Why are you tracking them? Tucker was quiet for so long that Flora thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and filled with a controlled anger. 3 years ago, they killed my brother. Thomas was a marshal in Colorado Territory. He got too close to uncovering their operations, so they ambushed him. Tucker's hand unconsciously moved to a thin scar along his jawline. I was with him. They left me for dead. Flora reached out, placing her hand over his. I'm so sorry, Tucker. He turned his hand to hold hers, his grip warm and strong. When I recovered, I made it my mission to bring them to justice. I've been following their trail ever since. That's why you were coming to see my father, Flora realized. You weren't really here to buy cattle. Tucker met her gaze, moonlight reflecting in his eyes. I heard rumors that the Blackwell gang was extorting money from ranchers in this area. Your father's name came up. I thought he might help me track them down. And now, Flora asked softly. Now I have 2 reasons to stay, Tucker replied, his voice equally soft. They sat there, hands joined, as the night deepened around them. Flora felt something shift between them, a connection forming that was both thrilling and terrifying in its intensity. The following morning, Flora woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where Tucker stood at the stove, expertly flipping pancakes. I didn't know cowboys could cook, she teased, filling a cup with coffee. Tucker grinned over his shoulder. There's a lot you don't know about me, Flora Garrison. They ate breakfast together, the easy companionship of the past few days deepening into something more. Flora found herself noticing small details about Tucker, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the careful way he handled delicate things despite his strength, the gentle timbre of his voice when he spoke her name. I need to ride into town today, Flora announced as they cleared the dishes. We're almost out of supplies, and I should at least make an appearance so people don't think I'm hiding. Tucker frowned. You might run into Jenkins. I can handle Herbert Jenkins, Flora replied with more confidence than she felt. Besides, I need to face him eventually. Tucker studied her for a moment, then nodded. I'll come with you. You don't have to, I want to, he interrupted firmly. If that's all right with you. Flora felt a flutter in her chest at his protectiveness. All right. They rode into Willow Creek side by side, Flora on her dappled mare and Tucker on his chestnut stallion. As they approached the town's main street, Flora became acutely aware of the glances and whispers their arrival provoked. News traveled fast in small towns, and everyone knew about Jenkins' proposition. At the general store, Mrs. Peterson greeted Flora with a mix of sympathy and curiosity, her eyes darting between Flora and Tucker. Good morning, Miss Garrison, she said, arranging some fabric bolts. We haven't seen you in town since the funeral. How are you holding up? As well as can be expected, Mrs. Peterson, Flora replied politely. This is Mr. Zimmerman, a friend of my father's. He's helping me with the ranch for a while. Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows rose. Is that so? How? Neighborly of him. Tucker tipped his hat to the shopkeeper. Madam. As Flora selected supplies, she could hear Mrs. Peterson attempting to extract information from Tucker, who answered her questions politely but revealed little. Flora hid a smile at the shopkeeper's frustrated expression. They were loading their purchases onto their horses when a well-dressed young man approached, his polished boots incongruous on the dusty street. "Flora," he called, his voice carrying an affected Eastern accent. "What a pleasant surprise." Flora stiffened. "Franklin." Franklin Jenkins looked exactly as Flora remembered, handsome in a conventional way, with perfectly combed hair and clothes far too fine for the frontier. His eyes moved over her possessively before shifting to Tucker with obvious displeasure. "I don't believe we've met," he said coldly, extending a hand. "Franklin Jenkins." "Tucker Zimmerman," Tucker replied, shaking Franklin's hand with perhaps more force than necessary. "Mr. Zimmerman is helping me with the ranch," Flora explained, her tone deliberately neutral. Franklin's smile tightened. "How fortunate for you to find assistance so quickly, though soon enough such concerns won't trouble you any longer." "That remains to be seen," Flora replied evenly. Franklin's expression hardened momentarily before he masked it with another smile. "Father and I look forward to your decision on Sunday. Until then." He tipped his hat and walked away, his back rigid with displeasure. "Charming fellow," Tucker muttered as they mounted their horses. Flora laughed despite herself. "The most eligible bachelor in Willow Creek, according to the local mothers." "Their standards must be remarkably low," Tucker replied, drawing another laugh from Flora. They were about to leave town when a commotion near the saloon caught their attention. A group of rough-looking men had dismounted and were tying their horses to the hitching post. Flora felt Tucker stiffen beside her. "What is it?" she asked, noting his sudden alertness. "The man in the black coat," Tucker said quietly. "That's Samuel Blackwell." Flora looked at the man in question, tall and broad-shouldered, with a cruel set to his mouth and dead eyes that scanned the street with calculating interest. "The leader of the gang," she whispered, realization dawning. "The men who killed my father and my brother," Tucker added grimly. "Stay close to me." They urged their horses forward, intending to leave town before Blackwell noticed them, but fate had other plans. As they passed the saloon, Blackwell emerged onto the boardwalk, his gaze falling directly on Tucker. Recognition flashed in the outlaw's eyes, followed by a slow, malicious smile. "Well, well," he called out. "If it isn't the marshal's little brother, still chasing shadows, boy." Tucker reined in his horse, his expression carefully neutral despite the tension Flora could see in his shoulders. "Blackwell," the outlaw sauntered to the edge of the boardwalk, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Thought we'd settled our business in Colorado." "Our business won't be settled until you're hanging from a gallows," Tucker replied evenly. Blackwell laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Big words from a man who couldn't even protect his own brother. His gaze shifted to Flora, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Found yourself a pretty distraction, I see." Tucker moved his horse slightly, positioning himself between Flora and Blackwell. "Leave the lady out of this." "The lady," Blackwell repeated mockingly. "You mean the Garrison girl? We've already been introduced, in a manner of speaking. Her father and I had an arrangement." Flora felt rage bubble up inside her. "You killed my father," she said, her voice shaking with anger. Blackwell shrugged. "Business is business. He stopped paying, consequences followed." Tucker's hand moved toward his holster, but Flora stopped him with a touch on his arm. "Not here," she murmured. "Not now." Tucker hesitated, then nodded slightly. Turning back to Blackwell, he said, "This isn't over." "No," Blackwell agreed, his smile widening. "It isn't." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Enjoy your day, Miss Garrison. Give my regards to your father." With that, he turned and sauntered back into the saloon, his laughter floating behind him. Tucker and Flora rode out of town in tense silence. Once they were well away from prying eyes, Tucker reined in his horse, his expression thunderous. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice tight with restrained fury. "I shouldn't have confronted him like that. I put you in danger." "You didn't know he would be there," Flora replied, "and I'm not afraid." Tucker looked at her, his expression softening. "You should be." "Men like Blackwell don't make idle threats." "Neither do men like you," Flora observed quietly. Tucker held her gaze for a long moment. "No," he agreed, "they don't." They continued toward the ranch, the encounter with Blackwell casting a shadow over what had begun as a pleasant day. As they rode, Flora considered all she'd learned about Tucker Zimmerman, his mission of vengeance, his connection to her father's murder, the danger that seemed to follow him. Yet despite all that, she felt safer with him than she had with anyone since her father died. There was something about Tucker that inspired trust, a steadiness, a core of integrity that shone through his actions more than his words. As they crested the final hill before the ranch, Flora made her decision. Whatever happened with Jenkins and his son, whatever dangers lay ahead with Blackwell, she wanted Tucker by her side. They reached the ranch by mid-afternoon. As they unsaddled their horses, Tucker remained uncharacteristically quiet, his thoughts clearly troubled. "What are you thinking?" Flora asked as they carried their supplies to the house. Tucker set down the packages on the kitchen table and turned to face her. "I'm thinking that my presence here puts you in danger. Blackwell knows where to find me now, and he's not above hurting innocent people to get to me." "I was already in danger," Flora pointed out. "My father's death proves that, if anything, having you here makes me safer." Tucker ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "Then tell me," Flora challenged. "Tell me everything." And so he did. As evening fell, they sat at the kitchen table while Tucker recounted his history with the Blackwell gang, how they'd started as simple cattle rustlers before expanding into extortion, robbery, and murder. How his brother had been tracking them for months before the ambush. How Tucker had spent the last 3 years gathering evidence and following their trail across 3 territories. "The law can't touch them," Tucker explained. "They bribe officials, intimidate witnesses, disappear across territorial lines before marshals can organize posses." "So you're seeking justice on your own," Flora concluded. Tucker nodded grimly. "Someone has to." "And now they're here in Willow Creek," Flora mused. "Why?" "Same reason they go anywhere," Tucker replied. "Money. Ranchers like your father are easy targets for extortion, and this town is remote enough that law enforcement is minimal." Flora considered this information, pieces falling into place. That's why Jenkins hasn't done anything about them, she realized. He's letting them terrorize small ranchers so they'll default on their loans, then he can acquire the land cheaply. Tucker looked impressed by her deduction. "You have a quick mind, Flora Garrison. My father always said understanding people's motivations was the key to survival out here," she replied. "So Jenkins is using Blackwell's gang to further his own interests." "It's possible," Tucker agreed, though proving it would be difficult. They fell silent, both contemplating the implications of this theory. Finally, Flora spoke. "So what do we do now?" Tucker raised an eyebrow. Yes, we, Flora said firmly. "My father was murdered by these men. I have as much right to see justice done as you do." Tucker studied her for a long moment, respect dawning in his eyes. "You're quite remarkable, you know that." Flora felt heat rise to her cheeks at his admiration. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." "No," Tucker said softly, "you're not." Their gazes held, something unspoken passing between them. Flora felt her heart quicken, aware of how close they were sitting, how intimate the kitchen felt in the lamplight. Tucker cleared his throat and leaned back, breaking the moment. "First thing tomorrow, we need to reinforce the house and outbuildings. If Blackwell decides to come calling, we need to be prepared." Flora nodded, both relieved and disappointed by the return to practical matters. "And what about Jenkins? Sunday is the day after tomorrow." Tucker's expression darkened. "One problem at a time, let's secure the ranch first, then we'll deal with Jenkins." That night, Flora lay awake longer than usual, her thoughts shifting between fear of Blackwell, dread of Jenkins' ultimatum, and increasingly her growing feelings for Tucker Zimmerman. In just a few days, he had become essential to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. The following day was spent securing the ranch. Tucker showed Flora how to barricade windows and doors, where to position herself for the best defensive advantage, and most shockingly to Flora how to shoot the rifle her father had kept but never taught her to use. "Your stance is good," Tucker observed as Flora took aim at a tin can set on a fence post, "but relax your shoulders. Tension makes your aim waver." Flora took a deep breath, adjusting as instructed. When she squeezed the trigger, the can flew off the post with a satisfying ping. I hit it." She exclaimed, surprised by her own success. Tucker grinned. "Never doubted you would, you're a natural." By sunset, they had transformed the ranch into a defensible position. Tucker insisted on taking the first watch, promising to wake Flora for the second shift. "Do you really think they'll come tonight?" Flora asked as they stood on the porch, the day's last light fading from the sky. "Better to be prepared," Tucker replied. "Blackwell isn't known for his patience," Flora nodded, understanding the wisdom in his caution. "Wake me when it's my turn," she insisted. "I won't have you staying up all night." Tucker's lips quirked in a small smile. "Yes, madam." True to his word, Tucker woke Flora around midnight. She found him sitting at the kitchen table, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. "Any trouble?" she asked, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "All quiet," Tucker reported. "But stay alert. Dawn is often when they strike." Flora nodded, settling into a chair near the window where she could watch the approach to the house. Tucker hesitated before retiring to the bunkhouse, concern evident in his expression. "I'll be fine," Flora assured him. "Go rest." The night passed slowly, each creak of the house and rustle of wind making Flora tense. But dawn arrived without incident, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Flora was making a fresh pot of coffee when Tucker entered the kitchen, looking rested despite the early hour. "Quiet night?" he asked. Flora nodded. "Not even a coyote to break the silence." Tucker frowned slightly. "That's what worries me. You think they're planning something?" "Blackwell isn't the type to let a challenge go unanswered," Tucker replied. "And yesterday was definitely a challenge." They spent the morning checking and reinforcing their preparations, both aware that Sunday and Flora's deadline with Jenkins loomed large. By midday, there was little more they could do but wait. They were sitting on the porch, sharing a simple lunch of bread and cheese when Tucker suddenly stiffened, his eyes fixed on the distant road. "Riders coming," he said quietly, setting aside his plate. "3 of them." Flora followed his gaze, making out the approaching figures. "Is it Blackwell?" "No," Tucker replied, his expression darkening. "It's Jenkins and his son." Flora felt her stomach knot with dread as she recognized the banker's buggy, accompanied by a rider she didn't know. "What are they doing here? I'm not supposed to give my answer until tomorrow." "They're not waiting for your answer," Tucker said grimly. "They're here to collect." He stood, offering Flora his hand. "Whatever happens, let me handle this." Flora took his hand, drawing strength from his steady grip. "It's my fight too, Tucker." He nodded, acknowledging her right to stand her ground. Together, then. They waited on the porch as the buggy pulled up to the house. Herbert Jenkins climbed down first, followed by his son Franklin. The third man remained mounted, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Miss Garrison," Jenkins called, his tone falsely jovial. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "What do you want, Mr. Jenkins?" Flora asked coolly. "Our arrangement was for me to give my answer after Sunday service." Jenkins' smile tightened. "Plans change, my dear. Circumstances have evolved." "What circumstances?" Tucker asked, his voice level but carrying an undercurrent of danger. Jenkins regarded Tucker with open dislike. "This is a private matter between Miss Garrison and my family, Mr. Zimmerman. Your presence is neither required nor welcome." "Mr. Zimmerman is my guest," Flora countered. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of him." Jenkins exchanged a glance with his son, who looked increasingly annoyed. "Very well. To be blunt, Miss Garrison, we've come to collect on your father's debt, today." "That wasn't our agreement," Flora protested. "The bank reserves the right to call in loans at any time," Jenkins replied smoothly, "particularly when circumstances suggest the debtor may be unreliable." "What circumstances?" Tucker repeated, his patience clearly wearing thin. It was Franklin who answered, stepping forward with a sneer. "Your circumstances, Zimmerman. Your association with the lady calls her judgment into question." Tucker's expression remained neutral, but Flora could see the tension in his jaw. "My association." "Don't play innocent," Franklin scoffed. "The whole town knows you're after the Blackwell gang. Associating with a vengeance-driven drifter puts Miss Garrison at risk and, by extension, puts the bank's investment at risk." "So that's it," Flora said, realization dawning. You're afraid Blackwell might destroy the ranch before you can get your hands on it. Jenkins had the grace to look uncomfortable at her direct accusation. Business is business, Miss Garrison. We need to protect our interests. And your son needs a wife, Flora added bitterly. Franklin stepped forward, his handsome face twisted with arrogance. You should be grateful for my interest, Flora. A woman in your position has few options. She has at least one more option than you think, Tucker interjected, his voice calm but firm, all eyes turned to him. Jenkins raised an eyebrow. And what might that be? Tucker moved slightly, positioning himself beside Flora rather than in front of her, a subtle gesture of partnership rather than protection that wasn't lost on her. Miss Garrison doesn't need to marry your son to settle her debts, Tucker said evenly. I'll pay what she owes. A stunned silence followed his declaration. Flora stared at Tucker in shock while Jenkins and his son exchanged incredulous glances. You, Franklin finally sputtered. A common cowboy, you couldn't possibly have that kind of money. Tucker's expression remained impassive. I have enough. Jenkins studied Tucker with new interest, clearly reassessing the man before him. Even if that were true, Mr. Zimmerman, what would you gain from such generosity? That's between Miss Garrison and myself, Tucker replied coolly, Franklin's face flushed with anger. If you think you can buy her instead, no one is buying me, Flora interrupted, her voice sharp with anger. I am not for sale, not to you, not to anyone. Tucker nodded in agreement. Miss Garrison is right. I'm not offering to pay her debt in exchange for her hand. I'm offering her a choice. Jenkins' eyes narrowed calculatingly. A choice? Yes, Tucker said firmly. A choice that doesn't involve being coerced into marriage. The banker studied Tucker for a long moment, then turned to Flora. Is this what you want, Miss Garrison, to place your trust in a drifter rather than in a respectable family? Before Flora could answer, the sound of approaching riders drew everyone's attention. Tucker's hand moved to his holster as a group of 5 men galloped toward the ranch, dust billowing behind them. Blackwell, Tucker muttered, recognizing the lead rider. Jenkins paled visibly, while his son took an involuntary step back. The third man who had accompanied them, clearly a hired gun, readied his weapon. This is your doing, Franklin accused Tucker. You've brought them down on us. Get inside, Tucker ordered Flora, his voice urgent but controlled. Now, I won't leave you out here alone, she protested. Flora, Tucker said, his eyes meeting hers. Please, something in his gaze convinced her. Flora nodded and retreated to the doorway where she could still observe but had the protection of the house. As Blackwell and his men approached, Jenkins and his son hurried back to their buggy, clearly intent on fleeing. But they weren't quick enough. The outlaws surrounded them, cutting off their escape. Samuel Blackwell dismounted, a cold smile on his face as he surveyed the scene. Well now, isn't this cozy? The banker, his pampered son, and the vengeance-seeking cowboy all in one place. This doesn't concern you, Blackwell, Jenkins said, his voice betraying his fear despite his attempt at authority. Our business here is legitimate, Blackwell laughed. Is that what you call it? Seems to me you're muscling in on my territory, Jenkins. I've been collecting from the Garrison ranch for months. Now you want a piece. Tucker stepped forward, drawing Blackwell's attention. The Garrison ranch isn't anyone's territory anymore, not yours, not Jenkins. Blackwell's eyes gleamed with malicious amusement. And I suppose it's yours now, Zimmerman. First my business, then my woman. She was never your woman, Tucker replied evenly. No, Blackwell grinned, looking past Tucker to where Flora stood in the doorway. Her father paid me with promises of her hand if he couldn't meet his debts. Isn't that right, Miss Garrison? Flora felt her blood run cold. You're lying. My father would never ask Jenkins, Blackwell interrupted. He knows all about it. Why do you think he's so eager to claim you for his son? To keep you from me. All eyes turned to the banker, who had gone deathly pale. That's preposterous, he stammered, but his reaction confirmed Blackwell's words. Flora felt dizzy with the revelation, memories of her father's increasing anxiety in the months before his death suddenly making terrible sense. You knew, she whispered, staring at Jenkins. You knew what my father had promised him. Jenkins swallowed hard. It was just talk. Jonathan was desperate. You never thought Blackwell would come to collect, Tucker finished for him. So you figured you'd get to her first, marry her to your son, and secure the land before Blackwell could stake his claim. Franklin looked at his father in horror. Father. Tell me this isn't true. Jenkins couldn't meet his son's eyes, his silence damning. Blackwell laughed again, clearly enjoying the drama unfolding. So now we have 3 men claiming the same woman. How do you propose we settle this, gentlemen? A bidding war, perhaps? Nobody is bidding for me, Flora declared, stepping out onto the porch despite Tucker's warning glance. I am not my father's to promise, nor am I a prize to be won. Blackwell's smile widened. Spirited, I like that in a woman. It makes breaking them more satisfying. Tucker's hand moved to his holster, his patience clearly at an end. That's enough, Blackwell. The outlaw's eyes glittered dangerously. Is it? I don't think so. I've come to claim what's mine, the woman and the land. Anyone who objects can deal with me and my men. He gestured to his 4 companions, who had their hands on their weapons. The tension in the air was palpable, the situation balanced on a knife's edge. Jenkins and his son stood frozen by their buggy, while their hired gun looked increasingly nervous at the odds against them. Tucker stood alone between Flora and the outlaws, outnumbered but unflinching. There's another option, Tucker said calmly. You and me, Blackwell, one-on-one, winner takes all. Blackwell considered this, intrigued by the challenge. You're offering to duel for her. For justice, Tucker corrected. For my brother, for Jonathan Garrison, for everyone you've terrorized, the outlaw laughed. Noble as always, just like your brother before I put a bullet in his chest. He looked around at the assembled witnesses. Very well, a duel it is. When I kill you, no one will question my right to take what I want. And when I kill you, your men will leave peacefully, Tucker countered. No reprisals against Miss Garrison or anyone else. Blackwell glanced at his men, who nodded their agreement, already anticipating their leader's easy victory. Agreed. Flora stepped forward, her heart pounding with fear. Tucker, no, this is madness. Tucker turned to her, his eyes gentle despite the gravity of the moment. Trust me, Flora. I won't let you die for me, she whispered fiercely. I'm not planning to die, he assured her. Then, more softly, and this isn't just for you, it's for all of us who deserve justice. Flora searched his face, seeing the determination there, the certainty. Finally, she nodded, stepping back to the porch. Jenkins cleared his throat nervously. This is all highly irregular. Dueling is illegal. Shut up, Jenkins, Blackwell snapped. Unless you want to face me next. The banker fell silent, his face ashen. Tucker and Blackwell moved to the center of the yard, standing about 20 paces apart. The outlaw's men, Jenkins and his son, and Flora all watched from the sidelines, the air thick with tension. On the count of 3, Blackwell called, his hand hovering near his holster. 1. Tucker stood relaxed but alert, his eyes never leaving Blackwell. 2. Flora held her breath, her hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. Before Blackwell could say 3, he drew his pistol with lightning speed, but Tucker was faster. His gun cleared leather in a blur, and he fired a single shot that struck Blackwell square in the chest. The outlaw staggered backward, shock registering on his face as he looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt. He tried to raise his gun, but his strength was failing. A second later, he collapsed to the ground. No one moved for a long moment. The echo of the gunshot seemed to hang in the air. Then Tucker approached Blackwell cautiously, kicking the outlaw's gun away before checking for signs of life. He's dead, Tucker announced, his voice carrying no triumph, only grim satisfaction. Blackwell's men shifted uneasily, hands still near their weapons. Tucker turned to face them, his own gun still drawn. We had a deal. Your boss lost. Ride out now and don't come back. The outlaws exchanged glances, clearly weighing their odds. Then the oldest among them nodded. Deal's a deal. We're done here. He looked at his companions. Mount up. As Blackwell's men collected their leader's body and rode away, a collective breath seemed to be released. Jenkins and his son remained by their buggy, looking shaken by the violence they had witnessed. Tucker holstered his weapon and turned to Flora, who rushed down from the porch to meet him. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him, relief making her knees weak. You could have been killed, she murmured against his chest. Tucker's arms came around her, holding her securely. Blackwell was always going to cheat, he said quietly. I was counting on it. Flora pulled back slightly to look up at him. You knew. Men like him don't fight fair, Tucker replied. It was their downfall in Colorado, and it was his downfall here. Jenkins cleared his throat loudly, reminding them of his presence. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the fact that Miss Garrison still owes the bank $3,200. Tucker released Flora and turned to face the banker. No, she doesn't. I beg your pardon, Jenkins sputtered. Show him, Tucker said to Flora, his eyes glinting with something that looked suspiciously like triumph. Flora frowned, confused. Show him what? The deed to your ranch, Tucker explained. The one in your father's desk. Still puzzled, Flora went into the house and retrieved the deed from her father's study. She returned to find Tucker and Jenkins engaged in a tense standoff, with Franklin looking increasingly uncomfortable. Here it is, she said, handing the document to Tucker. Tucker examined it briefly before holding it out for Jenkins to see. Notice anything interesting about this deed, Jenkins? The banker took the paper reluctantly, his eyes scanning the legal text. Suddenly, he paled. This isn't possible. What is it? Flora asked, looking between them. According to this deed, Tucker explained, your father paid off his mortgage in full last year. The ranch is yours, free and clear. Flora stared at him in disbelief. But the loans were fraudulent, Tucker finished. Jenkins has been collecting money on a debt that was already settled. Jenkins' face flushed with anger and fear. You can't prove that. The territorial marshal might disagree, Tucker replied evenly. Especially when he sees the bank's records. I took the liberty of examining them yesterday while in town. You broke into my bank, Jenkins gasped. Let's call it investigating financial irregularities, Tucker suggested with a dangerous smile. The marshal will be very interested to learn how you've been working with the Blackwell gang to terrorize ranchers into defaulting on loans that were already paid. Franklin stepped away from his father, shock and disgust written across his features. Father, tell me this isn't true. Jenkins' silence was answer enough. Flora felt lightheaded with the revelation. All this time, my father didn't owe you anything? He was paying twice, Tucker confirmed. Once to the bank, once to Blackwell. When he discovered Jenkins' fraud, he threatened to expose him. That's why Blackwell killed him, not because he stopped paying, but because he was going to reveal their scheme. Jenkins seemed to deflate before their eyes, his arrogance replaced by the desperate look of a cornered man. What do you want? He asked hoarsely. Money, I can pay you to keep quiet. Tucker shook his head. Justice isn't for sale, Jenkins. You're going to ride into town and turn yourself in to Sheriff Miller. You're going to confess everything, the fraud, your arrangement with Blackwell, all of it. And if I refuse, Jenkins challenged, a last flicker of defiance in his eyes. Then I'll bring the marshal to you, Tucker replied simply. Your choice. Jenkins looked around wildly as if seeking escape. Finding none, he slumped in defeat. I'll go, he muttered, but this isn't over. Yes, Tucker corrected him, it is. Franklin stepped forward, looking at Flora with genuine remorse. Miss Garrison, I had no knowledge of my father's dealings. I hope you believe that. Flora studied him, seeing the sincerity in his expression. I believe you, Franklin. But that doesn't change the fact that you were willing to buy a wife rather than earn her affection. Franklin flushed with shame. You're right, I've been wrong about many things. He glanced at his father, then back to Flora. I'll make sure my father does as Mr. Zimmerman says. And I'll see that restitution is made for any suffering he's caused you. With that, Franklin helped his subdued father into the buggy. Their hired gun, clearly wanting no part in the aftermath, rode ahead toward town. As the buggy pulled away, Flora felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, a burden she hadn't even known she was carrying. She turned to Tucker, who was watching her with a gentle expression. How did you know? She asked. About the deed, about Jenkins and Blackwell. Your father sent me a letter, Tucker admitted, before he died. He suspected Jenkins was defrauding ranchers throughout the territory and had partnered with Blackwell to intimidate them. He was gathering evidence when he trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. So when you came here, Flora realized, you weren't just tracking Blackwell for your brother, you were following up on my father's suspicions. Tucker nodded. Your father was a good man, Flora. He was trying to protect not just you but all the ranchers being victimized. When I heard he'd been killed, I knew I had to continue what he started. Flora took a step closer to him, her eyes searching his. Why didn't you tell me all this from the beginning? I needed to be sure, Tucker explained, and I didn't want to give you false hope. He hesitated, then added softly, or put you in more danger than you already were. Flora reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. Thank you for everything. Tucker's expression softened as he looked down at their joined hands. I should be thanking you, Flora Garrison, for your trust. For your courage, he paused, seeming to search for words, for showing me there's more to life than vengeance. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken feelings. Flora felt her heart racing as Tucker gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering on her cheek. What happens now? She whispered. Tucker's eyes, warm and sincere, held hers. That depends on you, on me, he nodded. The ranch is yours, free and clear. Your father's name will be cleared. Blackwell is gone. You can do whatever you want with your life now, Flora. And what about you? She asked, her voice barely audible. What will you do? Tucker's hand still rested against her cheek, warm and gentle. I've been chasing ghosts for 3 years. Maybe it's time I started looking toward the future instead. What kind of future? Flora pressed, her heart in her throat. A smile tugged at Tucker's lips. One with roots, a home, perhaps. He hesitated, vulnerability showing in his eyes. Perhaps someone to share it with. Flora's breath caught. Are you proposing Tucker Zimmerman? Not exactly, he replied, his smile widening. I'm suggesting a partnership. I know cattle, you know this land. Together we could build something here. His expression grew serious. But only if it's what you want. You've had enough of men trying to decide your future for you. Flora considered his words, emotion welling in her chest. This man, who had come into her life like a storm, had given her back her freedom, her home, and her dignity. And now he was offering her something she had never dared hope for, a partnership based on respect, mutual goals, and growing affection. I think, she said slowly, a smile spreading across her face, that my answer is yes. Tucker's eyes lit with joy. Yes to the partnership, or yes to something more? Both, Flora replied simply. Yes to both. With gentle deliberation, Tucker drew her closer, one hand still cradling her face while the other settled at her waist. May I? He murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. In answer, Flora rose on her toes and pressed her mouth to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Tucker's arms encircled her fully. Flora felt a sense of rightness, of coming home, as she melted against him. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you on that porch, he admitted. Flora laughed softly. Even covered in dust and grief, especially then, Tucker replied. Your strength amazed me. Flora stepped back slightly, though she kept her hands resting on his chest. So what now, partner? Where do we begin? Tucker glanced around the ranch, which suddenly seemed full of possibility rather than burden. First, we make sure Jenkins faces justice. Then we start rebuilding, fixing fences, increasing the herd, making this place everything your father dreamed it could be. And us? Flora asked, a hint of shyness in her question. Tucker's smile was tender as he brushed his thumb across her cheek. We take our time. Get to know each other properly. Build a foundation as strong as this land. Flora nodded, happiness bubbling up inside her. I'd like that. As the afternoon sun bathed the ranch in golden light, Flora and Tucker walked hand in hand toward the house, their house now, the beginning of their shared future. The shadows of the past were still there, her father's murder, Tucker's lost brother, the injustices they had faced, but they no longer loomed so large. Instead, Flora looked forward with hope. No one had bought her or sold her. She had chosen her own path, her own partner. And as Tucker squeezed her hand, his eyes reflecting the same joy she felt, Flora knew she had made the right choice. He can keep his money, Tucker had said of Franklin Jenkins, choosing Flora for herself rather than as a possession to be acquired. In those words, he had given her the greatest gift of all, the freedom to choose her own destiny, and she had chosen him. As Sunday dawned the following morning, Flora woke to the sound of Tucker in the kitchen, humming softly as he prepared breakfast. She dressed quickly and joined him, a sense of contentment washing over her at the domesticity of the scene. "Good morning," Tucker greeted her, a warm smile lighting his face. "Coffee's fresh." Flora accepted the cup he offered, their fingers brushing in a way that sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Something smells wonderful." "Flapjacks," Tucker replied, returning to the stove. "My mother's recipe." As they sat down to eat, Flora marveled at how natural it felt, sharing a meal and conversation with this man who had been a stranger just days ago. They discussed plans for the ranch, which fences needed immediate repair, how many cattle they should purchase to rebuild the herd, whether to expand the vegetable garden. "We should go to church today," Flora said as they cleared the dishes. "People will be expecting me to give Jenkins my answer." Tucker raised an eyebrow. "I imagine news of yesterday's events has already spread through town." "All the more reason to go," Flora pointed out. "Better to face the gossip directly than hide from it." Tucker nodded, admiration in his eyes. "You're right, as usual." They rode into town together, Flora wearing her best dress and Tucker in a clean shirt with his boots polished. As they approached the small white church, heads turned and whispers followed them. Flora held her head high, Tucker's steady presence beside her giving her confidence. The service passed in a blur of hymns and prayers, with Flora acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Sheriff Miller, who had taken Jenkins into custody the previous day, nodded respectfully to them from his pew. Franklin Jenkins was notably absent, presumably staying close to his disgraced father. After the final benediction, they stepped outside into the sunlight. Almost immediately, they were surrounded by townspeople eager for first-hand accounts of what had transpired at the Garrison Ranch. "Is it true you killed Samuel Blackwell in a duel?" Mrs. Peterson asked Tucker, her eyes wide with excitement. "And Herbert Jenkins was working with outlaws," added the blacksmith, shaking his head in disbelief. Tucker fielded the questions diplomatically while keeping a protective arm around Flora's waist. She was grateful for his support as she navigated the curiosity and occasional judgment of her neighbors. "What I want to know," declared Mrs. Peterson, adjusting her Sunday bonnet, "is whether we'll be hearing wedding bells soon. The whole town expected an announcement today, though we thought it would involve young Franklin." Flora felt herself blush as all eyes turned to her expectantly. Tucker's arm tightened slightly around her waist in silent support. "Mr. Zimmerman and I are partners in rebuilding my father's ranch," Flora replied carefully. "As for anything more personal, that's between us for now, Mrs. Peterson looked disappointed by this non-answer, but Sheriff Miller stepped forward, effectively ending the interrogation. "Miss Garrison, Mr. Zimmerman, I'd like to thank you both for your help in bringing Jenkins to justice. The territorial marshal will be arriving tomorrow to take him to Cheyenne for trial." "Will he stand trial for my father's murder as well?" Flora asked. Miller shook his head. "We can't prove he ordered the killing, only that he was in business with Blackwell. But he'll face plenty of other charges: fraud, conspiracy, extortion. He won't see the outside of a prison for many years. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something." Flora nodded her acceptance. As they prepared to leave, the sheriff pulled Tucker aside for a private word. Flora watched them from a distance, noting the respect with which Miller addressed Tucker. When Tucker rejoined her, his expression was thoughtful. "What did he want?" Flora asked as they mounted their horses. "He offered me a job," Tucker replied. "Deputy sheriff." Flora's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Are you considering it?" Tucker shrugged. "It would mean a steady income while we rebuild the ranch, and the town could use someone with experience tracking outlaws." "You'd be good at it," Flora observed, "though I worry about the dangers." Tucker's eyes softened as he looked at her. "I can take care of myself, but I appreciate your concern." "It's more than concern," Flora admitted quietly. "I've lost enough people I care about." Tucker reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "You won't lose me, Flora Garrison. That's a promise." As summer turned to fall, the Garrison Ranch flourished under Tucker and Flora's care. Tucker divided his time between his deputy duties in town and working the land, while Flora managed the household and kept the books with meticulous precision. Their partnership deepened into something richer with each passing day. They learned each other's habits and preferences, strengths and weaknesses. They shared stories of their pasts, Flora speaking of her mother's gentle wisdom and her father's dreams for the ranch, Tucker recounting adventures with his brother and the quiet lessons his parents had instilled before their passing. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch watching the sunset, sometimes talking, sometimes sharing comfortable silence. It was during one such evening, as the first frost of October painted the grass with silver, that Tucker finally asked the question Flora had been waiting for. "Flora Garrison," he said, taking her hands in his, "I love you, not just as a partner or a friend, but with everything I am. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Flora's heart soared as she looked into his eyes, seeing all the admiration, respect, and love she felt for him reflected back at her. "Yes, Tucker Zimmerman, yes, I will marry you." Their wedding took place on a crisp November day, with the mountains dusted with early snow and the ranch decorated with autumn leaves and late-blooming wildflowers. The entire town turned out for the celebration, eager to witness the union of the brave young woman who had stood her ground and the deputy who had brought justice to Willow Creek. Sheriff Miller performed the ceremony, his usual gruff demeanor softened for the occasion. "Mrs. Peterson cried unabashedly, declaring it the most romantic thing she'd ever witnessed. Even Franklin Jenkins, who had worked to distance himself from his father's crimes, sent a silver serving tray with his best wishes. As Flora and Tucker exchanged their vows, she thought of how far they had come from that first meeting, she a grieving daughter facing ruin, he a vengeance-seeking drifter with nowhere to call home. Now they stood together, partners in every sense, building a future neither could have imagined just months before. "I take you, Flora Garrison, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Tucker said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to love and cherish you, to honor and respect you, to walk beside you through all of life's challenges and joys, as long as we both shall live." "And I take you, Tucker Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded husband," Flora replied, her heart full. "I promise to love and support you, to stand by your side as your equal partner, to build our dreams together for all the days of our lives." Their kiss sealed the promises, sweet and tender and full of hope for the future they would share. The celebration continued well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than the entire town could consume. When the last guests had departed, Tucker carried Flora across the threshold of their home, no longer her father's house, but truly theirs now. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zimmerman," he murmured, setting her gently on her feet in the parlor. Flora smiled up at him, joy bubbling through her veins like champagne. "Home," she repeated softly, "our home." That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Flora rested her head on Tucker's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His arms around her felt like the safest place in the world, not a cage of possession, but a haven of mutual care and respect. "What are you thinking?" Tucker asked, his fingers gently combing through her hair. "I'm thinking about choices," Flora replied thoughtfully. "How sometimes the worst circumstances can lead to the best decisions." Tucker's arms tightened around her. "If Jenkins hadn't tried to buy you for his son, we might never have met. And if your brother hadn't been killed, you might never have come to Wyoming," Flora added softly. "It seems wrong to find happiness growing from such painful roots." "No," Tucker disagreed gently. "It's what gives meaning to the suffering, the knowledge that something good can come from it." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Thomas would be happy for me for us. He always said I needed to find something to live for, not just something to fight against." Flora raised herself on one elbow to look down at her husband's face, illuminated by moonlight streaming through the window. "And have you found something to live for?" Tucker's smile was tender as he cupped her cheek. "I've found everything, Flora, everything that matters." As years passed, the Garrison Zimmerman Ranch grew into one of the most prosperous in the territory. They expanded their herd, built new barns and corrals, and employed several hands during busy seasons. Tucker continued his work as deputy sheriff, earning a reputation for fairness and integrity that extended far beyond Willow Creek. Their family grew as well. In the spring of 1877, Flora gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Tucker's mother. 2 years later came Jonathan, named for Flora's father. And in 1882, Thomas joined the family, carrying on the name of the uncle he would never meet, but whose legacy of justice lived on through his father. Through it all, the challenges of ranching life, the dangers of Tucker's work, the everyday trials of raising children on the frontier, their partnership remained unshakable. They faced each obstacle together, drawing strength from their complementary skills and shared determination. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Tucker surprised Flora with a special gift, a hand-carved wooden sign to replace the weathered one at the entrance to their property. The new sign read Garrison Zimmerman Ranch, with the words Freedom's Choice carved beneath in flowing script. "Freedom's Choice?" Flora questioned as they stood together admiring the sign. Tucker slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Because that's what we built here. Not a ranch bought with blood money or extortion, not a marriage forced by financial pressure. A home and a family created by free choice, yours and mine." Flora leaned into his embrace, overwhelmed by the perfect sentiment behind his gift. "I choose you," she whispered. "Every day I choose you." As twilight settled over the land they had nurtured together, Flora and Tucker walked hand in hand back toward the house where their children waited. The path before them was illuminated by the warm glow of lantern light spilling from windows, a beacon of home and family, of promises kept and love freely given. No one had bought Flora Garrison. No one had sold her. She had claimed her own destiny, alongside the man who had recognized her worth beyond any price. And in that choice, made not from desperation, but from love, they had found a happiness greater than either could have imagined on that fateful day when a cowboy rode up to a grieving daughter's door and changed her life forever.